Great. So welcome tonight to this last meeting before Easter with RAG. We're going to have, or last week, we had a tour de force from Kit Opie, evolutionary anthropologist, on the importance of understanding behavioral ecology of primate mating systems for understanding the emergence and the problems that Homo sapiens and Homo sapiens ancestors had to solve. Tonight, we're switching to another, the area of social anthropology, particularly for an appreciation of the cosmopolitics of symbols of serpentine origin, which Ivan Tacey, our colleague and former student, we're very proud of Ivan as a former student from University of East London. Ivan Tacey has been exploring this range of cosmopolitics of snake symbolism and snake entities, rainbow snakes, dragons, rainbow nagas, and so on, all around the world. So this is, again, it's kind of a universalizing theory that gets to grips with our very origins and emergence as Homo sapiens in some sense. But this is really being applied to particularly Ivan's work with the Batek in Malaysia, hunter-gatherers, egalitarian hunter-gatherers, who of course are very, very interesting. He's had many decades of work, field work with the Batek, very interesting in comparison to the work that we're mostly familiar with in RAG on African hunter-gatherers. So I think that's all I need to say now.
Yeah, that's great.
Wonderful to
okay.
All the way from.
Thanks, Camilla, and thanks, Chris, for inviting me here today. So, yeah, the title of the talk today is Serpentine Cosmopolitics. So my name's Ivan. I'm an anthropologist based at the University of Plymouth. Unfortunately today, my laptop died on the way up here, and I did have a few different slides which were lost. My laptop died at Exeter, so some of the slides are slightly different than I'd hoped, but anyway, we shall work with these ones. Let's move on. So I don't know if many people will have heard of them. People that come regularly might have heard of the Batek. I've been working there since around 2006 with Batek communities. This, as you can see on the top part of the slide here, is Peninsular Malaysia, which is just south of Thailand or Singapore. I work in that small box area, which is this larger map here. So this green area, if you can see the green from here online, this is a kind of forested area, basically. This is a national park. It's protected before, of course, until right up to kind of the 60s and 70s or early 70s. This was all covered in rainforest. It's been deforested. That's why it's white, mainly deforested, and converted to palm oil plantations. So I'm particularly interested in life on the edges between the forest and the palm oil plantations, and how people have adapted, how their cosmologies, their economic practices, their relationships to spirits, how they're affected by these massive changes that are occurring. So I work with two groups of Batek. The Batek Day, who are more famous, Kirk Endicott, and his wife Karen Endicott, famous to work with them in the 70s and 80s. Light Up Poe worked with them in the 90s. And I started work with them about the same time as Diana Ribberley, back in around 2006. Since then, we've got Vivek, who's online today, who's working with them. Alice Rudge, who's in the room, who's been working with them in Pahang. But those people are working with Batek Day groups. I'm working also with Batek Maya groups who live in this area, who are a much smaller group. Their language is different, you know, and their religious practices are slightly different, but they're all former hunter-gatherers, and many of them do continue hunting and gathering today. And as Camilla said in her introduction, there's a lot of similarities with African hunter-gatherers, particularly in like social organization, economies, and so forth. But there are differences, that lifestyles are much less ritualized than groups like the Hadzabe, Kumsan, Buti, Membajele, etc. Okay, so I'll be talking about that today. Not sure where I should stand. So, okay, so they're hunter-gatherer collectors or post-foragers. They're they're famously known as being gender egalitarian. That's actually changing a bit now with resettlement outside the forest, with Islamization and changes to lifestyle. They're part of what we call the Orang Asli, which are the Aboriginal or the original peoples of Peninsular Malaysia. They speak Austroasiatic languages, which are in the kind of Mon Khmer family. Most of them are still animists, although a lot of people have nominally converted to Islam. And some people that I met even in 2006 said, "Oh no, I'm really a Muslim," but then later they said, "Well, I'm not really. I'm still an animist." So it's kind of in between. But the problem is though, the kids are sent to in the resettlement villages, sent to schools, so they grow up kind of separate from the rainforest. And I mean, last summer I was there with my son and an older man, a younger man with me in the forest, my son, and the older guy was saying, you know, they don't know the taboos. And then I started questioning. I said, "Oh yeah, I'm sure they do," you know. And I started to talk to this young man, and he really didn't, you know. And then I said, "Well, what about this?" And I started questioning, and the older man said, "You know more than him," you know. It was quite worrying actually, because people forget things. And they blame that on people being excited about life outside the forest, mobile phones, etc. So things are changing a bit. The population figure is actually slightly higher than this. I'd say probably, what do you think, Alice? About 2,000 Batek Day now, I would guess. And around about 300 Batek Maya. So they face a lot of problems. Deforestation, conversion to oil palm plantations, there's mining, quarrying, Islamization, there's Christianization of certain groups as well. There's complete lack of land rights. They're politically marginalized, and those groups that are relocated outside the forest are living in poverty. Right. So one thing that I want to say quickly is a comment about the term cosmopolitics. So unfortunately, my slide on this is missing due to my computer crashing. Cosmopolitics is a term that's used quite a lot by people like Isabel Stengers, Bruno Latour, and in one sense of how they use it, it refers to a kind of more than human world, a more inclusive politics that takes into account many more forces or entities. So this would include anything from non-human animals to spirits to ghosts, whatever you like. So in that sense, I agree. That's a nice move towards an inclusive world with other agents in it that can act upon the world. But they also, many people associated with this kind of cosmopolitical turn, which in anthropology is also linked to movements like new animism, spectivism, etc. They sometimes talk about multiple incommensurable worlds. And personally, I do not go along with that idea. I think when you live in one world, people might have multiple ways of relating to the world, but Bateks can relate to the world very scientifically, just as Western scientists can relate to the world through a religious lens. At the same time, do you see what I mean? You can have multiple ways of relating to the world and being in the world. Doesn't mean you're living in ontologically separate spheres, if you like, which is rather like the American kind of culturalist anthropology, I see it as this kind of remake of that. Right, but in this talk, I really want to kind of move towards reclaiming the term cosmopolitics to actually look at how bodies are linked up with landscapes, with weather systems, with the moon. And I'll return to this throughout the talk, and hopefully we'll come back to that in the conclusion. So rather than being a kind of somewhat wishy-washy, okay, we're all this more than human club all together, I would argue it's fundamental to what it means to be human, to be connected up with cosmic rhythms, if you like, with particularly lunar rhythms that we'll come to. It could have been kind of called lunar cosmopolitics in some ways, the talk as well. And we'll see how that really emerges through mythology. The difference between a lot of Southeast Asian hunter-gatherers and the African hunter-gatherers, that if you've come to other RAG lectures, you might have heard about. In Africa, hunter-gatherer groups, they have an extremely rich, very rich ritual life. For Bateks and other groups in Malaysia and other parts, it's not as ritualized at all, but we still see same if you like, what Camilla and Chris would refer to as the time-resistant syntax of myth and ritual in their cosmologies and in their mythologies. Okay, right. So, very simple. I had changed these pictures as well, but this is my mum made me this. This is an embroidery of the Batek cosmos. And on the other side there, this kind of simplified version. So to describe this briefly, if you imagine us living on Earth, above Earth, you see the Bateks will describe a kind of dome of the firmament. And above there will live these creator beings, the Halaksal. This is where we will go when we die as well, joining the Halaksal. We've got a separate place where this thunder deity called Gobar amongst the Batek Day, Kai amongst the Batek Maya, and you've got the moon and the sun moving across the sky. You've got a cosmic pillar, if you like, going up through the world. That's described in different ways amongst different groups. But under the world is supported on the back of this gigantic turtle snake dragon that they refer to, Batek Day, and sometimes Batek Maya refer to this as a naga, using the Sanskrit term. Sometimes they'll refer to it as Dranit, which really means rainbow. So it's most definitely a rainbow serpent, if you like. And Batek Maya refer to it most commonly as Baji. Okay. This cosmic serpent holds the world on her back, and below it, she keeps back the underworld sea, if you like. And if she gets angered, if people break taboos, for example, prohibitions, then she'll writhe, or goyang, they'll say. And that writhing will cause huge upswelling floods that could destroy the entire world. And when she does that, often the thunder deity acts in tandem with her by causing massive storms, sending out lightning, thunder, and rain. So you've got all these stories about floods. So underneath her is this underground sin. She's often associated with an old woman, a kind of grandmother figure called Yak. Okay, right. Let's move on. So I'm going to start with a moon myth. Okay, so this is a Batek Day myth. The Batek Maya one's slightly different. So when the creator, Tohan, made the first people, a man and a woman out of earth, so it's a kind of clay figure story, if you like, they create, and then he sneezes in a life force, Nyawa Bulan, the moon life force, sometimes known as Nyawa Tom, the water life force. And this is what gave the first, this is what animated the first people. And with the moon life force, this is from an interview conducted in Batek village in Serpentine. With the moon life force, we would die and come back to life. Die and come back to life with each new moon. So, of course, because people are immortal like that, they're dying and they're coming back. Soon there were too many people and there wasn't enough food for everyone. So Tohan removed this immortal moon life soul or water life soul, Nyawatom. They're the same thing, the same soul, which is two different terms for it. He removed this from the people and gave them the banana life force, or the banana life soul, Nyawa Bolan, which we'll have now. And when a banana when it's gone, but its children, if you like, live on. So this solved this overpopulation problem. They have other myths about this, but I think this is particularly interesting. It's this rhythmic movement coming back, alive and dying, alive and dying. And we'll refer to that. I'll come back to that later in the talk today. Batek landscapes are really incredible. I mean, for me, they're one of the most beautiful places on the planet. And you've got this huge rainforest area. Lucky for Batek, we actually have this remaining rainforest for Menrix, Jahai. It's all gone, really, or most of it's gone. On these karsts, they're limestone karsts, covered in forest at the top. Each karst has its own endemic flora. And so, for example, you'll get orchids that will only grow on one particular karst, or cycads that will only grow there. You'll get lizards particular karst. When these are not inaccessible places, they're very easy to get to, but they're incredibly understudied, not just by anthropologists and archaeologists. There's very interesting cave
You really wonder.
There's
how many
remains,
people,
and they're not being studied. But even when what's the word? Herpetologists? They go in there for like a week or so and they'll find new species immediately. Or a team will go in, a botanist, and they'll discover new species. You can just drive up I can go out and you find these new species. So it's really, for me, these should be protected landscapes, protected by UNESCO for multiple reasons, for their flora and fauna, but also, for me, more importantly, as an anthropologist, because most of them are kind of sacred sites akin to Uluru in Australia, okay? They contain a massive amount of knowledge, rather similarly to how Keith Basso describes for the Western Apache. These places hold myths, they hold stories, they're like mnemonic pegs that hang the history of the people on them. Yes?
Just quickly, do they have caves?
They do, incredible caves. You can go and they've got underground rivers. Of course, in there you have swallows and bats. So they provide what some people, I don't like the term, but ecosystem services. So obviously in Malaysia, a tropical country, you've got masses of mosquitoes that could spread malaria. So the more of these places that have bats and swallows that are eating those mosquitoes, the less chance, you know, they clean water comes out of them. They're just incredible places. Anyway, this slide I've entitled Naga's Bones because for the Batek Maya, this is on the western side of Taman Negara. They'll say, well, these are actually the bones of the ancient primordial world creating Nagas. Okay, so sometimes they talk about the Naga, if you like, actually as if it's one, sometimes as a multiplicity. And these are kind of seen as their bones in some cases, but there's, as I said, you know, there's multiple kind of layers of meaning on them. So I'll get to another one. So this is Batu Bonte. This is a site. So right up until 1920s, 1930s, Bateks, like many other indigenous Orang Asli peoples in the peninsula, were being hunted down by slave raiders. Okay, so including Rawas and Bataks from the Lake Toba region of Sumatra. They would come in. Thais would come in. So all these groups were being raided, and so they would run off and hide in the forest. They wouldn't light fires, all kinds of things to escape slave raiders. But the Batek Maya, Bateks, by the way, are famous. Their shamans are famous for tiger transformation. Okay, they can transform into all these large, powerful forest animals, but most importantly, tigers. And they're kind of feared for that in the area. And anyway, my Batek Maya friends explained to me that they were being chased by slave raiders one day, and they ran off to Batu Bonte. And there all of them, not just at that time, everyone had these shamanic powers, and they transformed into tigers. So when the slave raiders arrived, they were terrified and fled. So they've got these heroic tales of shamans performing acts like this. And the stories are all, you know, they're placed within the landscape like that. This is another one, Batu Kabang. It's a smaller, much smaller cast than Bonte, but it's still really huge. This summer, we recorded a lot of information about this site. But here, there was a group of Batek camped around here. There's a cave there, as you asked about the cave. And two guys had gone off hunting leaf monkeys in the forest. Other people were there. And someone laughed at a black millipede, okay, which is completely what they'd say Thailand in that group. And Batek Day would say Lawak. It's completely tabooed to laugh, to mock, to these animals, things like, there's all kinds of animals you shouldn't laugh at. I would recommend if you're with Bateks and Jahais, don't laugh at any of them, really. But there's some animals are worse to laugh at than others. And when you're walking around the forest, you've got to be really careful. I remember Vivek's online today, I remember when him and Tom were with me, and one of them said to me, Ivan, we can't talk about anything. Everything's Lawak, you know, and you do feel, you hear this term, taboo, 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 said all the time. Anyway, people laughed at this millipede. And then, obviously, this angered the Naga, angered Gobos. This huge flood swelled up from the underworld as Badgie wriggled and writhed. And then Gobos started sending down rain and lightning. Everyone was killed. Okay, well, one person must have survived to tell the story. And the two hunters were kind of frozen in spot in one place. So those stories, you know, these myths are not really free floating, you know, they're often anchored in the landscape itself. And this is really clever. I mean, I've forgotten the lady's name. There's an Australian lady, Lynn, I'll remember her name in a minute, written a lot about memory. So if you know, I'm sure people have heard of kind of memory palace techniques, you know, that were used by the Greeks and the Romans. You know, you walk around in your mind and you can place things in places. Or you probably know about I would hope, about Aboriginal songlines. So, you know, you can walk through a landscape, kind of sing the world into existence. And these are maps, these songlines. So Indigenous people across the planet have very, very clever ways of remembering things. I mean, obviously in the Western world, you know, we've had books, so oral traditions have disappeared more and more because of the printed page and now because of phones and things. But even when I teach my kids, when I was teaching my kids, say, the times tables, I would walk around through the countryside and we'd do it as we're walking. They remembered them like that because you remember things through movement. You remember things through connecting things with place. And I would say worldwide, Indigenous peoples are the masters of memory. They know how to. In Australia, for example, the stories are so ancient about landscapes, these songlines, that they can actually, so about 12,000 years ago, when at the end of the Ice Age, Australia was connected up with Papua New Guinea, and they can map under the sea. They know where these giant boulders are. So as you're singing the songs, you'll describe a boulder or a mountain or a ravine or whatever's there. And these maps extend out on the seaboard. And Batek stories, they remember things from very, very long ago. And they have their flood myths as well, which I would say are actual, probably, memories of these events. This is another one, Batu Taboyne. This is a nice story. So again, a group was camped here. Most people went off to the forest hunting and gathering in the day. One guy stayed there and his niece stayed too. And his niece was really beautiful and they were in love with each other, but it's incest, it's Thailand. And this guy, was getting really horny, the uncle, he starts, oh God, I want to have sex with her kind of thing. And they ended up having sex, and then Kai, the Thunderlord, came down, grabbed both of them, brings them up there, smashes them into the rock, and you see their blood stain there still today. So everyone remembers. So, and again, rather like, as Basso talks about the Western Apache, Bateks tend to be very indirect. You won't say, don't do that, it's incest kind of thing. You know, you can start talking about the place. Oh, you remember Batu Taboyne? You don't have to say the name of the place and people will know what's going on. So it's really a great way of encoding this information. Anyway, so some of the things I've been describing there have been, you find them amongst these kind of, this taboo system. Can't laugh at animals, you can't dress animals up in human clothes, you can't mock animals. You've got a thunder deity, you've got the Rainbow Serpent. Been described by people like Rodney Needham as the thunder complex. Okay, so it often links up stories of petrification, because actually what I could have said about some of these casts as well. Other stories overlaying all of these are in the Batek Maya area, associated with a guy called Senti. So Senti is a figure, he's like an ancient primordial shaman, but lived with, he lived with the Bateks, and he had two faces, one facing forward, one facing backwards. And so he was kind of a bit of a freak, really, and he was frightening to the people. And people were so frightened of him, even one day, even his wife and brothers and friends, they killed him because they were so scared of his appearance. But they didn't really kill him, and he came back and obviously was really angry about this. And he started just turning people he started petrifying people, so transforming them into these castes. That's another story about the castes. And Batek Day have a very similar figure called Takalamai. Amongst the Semilai, they use a similar term, very similar to Takalamai. So you've got these petrification stories. They're out in Borneo, you find them in the Philippines, you find them in Indonesia. The whole area is covered in a very similar thing, so the thunder complex. So if somebody does accidentally break a taboo, because animals can be quite amusing sometimes, and so people do obviously laugh about them. And then if a storm happens, then Bateks, both groups will do, I've got a picture here, yeah, this kind of blood sacrifice. So it's where you take a machete, you lightly tap your shin. It's not very painful at all, You take a little bit of blood, mix it with some rainwater, and you throw some over your left shoulder, and you're kind of doing an incantation, some over your right shoulder, some up for the sky god, if you like, for Gobar, and some down for the Rainbow Serpent. And the smell of this blood is said to go up to Kai or Gobar, whichever group's talking about them, down to the Naga. And it's that smell but wards them where they don't like the smell, they leave. So there are ways of doing things. That doesn't work. You could take some hair and you can burn some of your hair. They don't like that smell. Olfaction is central to ritual. Sorry, going back to that one. So a kind of simplified version of it. So this term, lawach or Thailand, big taboos, if you like, letting menstrual blood flow into streams, or the blood of childbirth flow into streams. That's completely taboo. Laughing at animals, the moon, Bulan, or Bidan, I've forgotten his name now. I was saying it to you guys earlier, I'll remember in a minute anyway. But the moon, you can't even point at the moon. You can't point at the rainbow. And you find similar stories in many other places too. Bees you shouldn't point at. Cooking different types of animals on the same fire. Here it could be, there's different ways of classing fire, but if you can kind of cook animals with similar body covering, so brown furry animals could be cooked on the same fire, but you couldn't cook, say, a monkey with a tortoise. They should be cooked on different fires. So different food types should be cooked, and it's said again that the odors of them will mingle, and that will be lawach. So certain animals like pigtail macaque, for example, if you kill one of those animals, then you have to butcher it well away from any water sources. You can take water from the river and then wash the carcass out, wash the intestines out and all this part. But if the blood goes in, that's lawach. Afterwards, you can't bathe in streams because, again, the odor is said to go down to these streams. Another type of lawach is classified as shaman amongst the Batek Day. Batek Maya would just simply refer to that as Thailand as well. That's incest and improper sexual behavior. And then for Batek Day, they refer to tola. So violence and other forms of inappropriate social behavior. So disrespecting older people, spitting, even kind of thinking, nasty thoughts they say you shouldn't really do. And most of the punishments are collective, actually. For all those lawach ones and shaman ones, shaman has individual punishments, but also collective punishments, which are these huge storms. And we find very similar prohibitions amongst many, many, many other Orang Asli groups. Okay, so that's why Needham calls it the Thunder Complex. But what I'm somewhat surprised by when I read, so he does a kind of psychoanalytical take on that. I don't buy it at all. There's various different things. What's problematic in lots of the accounts about Orang Asli, there's for me an over focus on this thunder deity. Okay, and much less is said about the Naga, this underworld serpent. And the Thunder Complex, when people talk about it, they talk about it in terms of Southeast Asia. But as we'll see in the rest of the talk, really, you can take a much broader picture and you can you find very similar stuff in Amazonia, you find very similar stuff in Australia, and you find very similar stuff in Africa and many other parts of the world. Okay, so anthropologists, I think, need to kind of go back to this comparative anthropology and look at other areas, because you can, why do you see these things? This is the big question. If you see something like this, which is it sounds quite unusual, but if you find very similar cultural patterns in other parts of the world, we have to ask the question, why? Okay, and that's what we're coming to. So here we said Needham, the association of blood, thunder, floods, to appease the gods, found across Malaysia, Philippines, Borneo, Eastern Indonesia, even as far as China. But this is the problems. Little mention of the Rainbow Serpent, little mention of menstrual bleeding, although menstrual taboos are found in all these groups. And it's not articulated, this link between the blood, the moon, serpents, women, and flooding, which perhaps we can see more vividly in Australian and Amazonian cosmologies. So if you take these cosmologies and then return to the Southeast Asian versions of it, maybe it makes more sense. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the moon and the sun here. So for the moon, Bulan, it's seen by Bateks as being cool. So the forest itself is cool. Yeah? that's why it's healthy. So the moon is cool, it's healthy, it's got a beautiful fragrance, whereas the sun, its opposite, is hot, it stinks, and stinks of rotting flesh. It's associated sometimes with the world of death, if you like. So this kind of cosmological mapping of kind of thermic code, if you like, we see in terms of the forest and the plantation. The forest is cool, the forest is healthy, the forest is fragrant, whereas the plantations, the towns, are hot, stinky, and dangerous. Okay, right. Moving on. This is a group of Batek Maya women preparing themselves in the forest to look beautiful. Okay, so I was out there, this is back in, when was this, 2019, with a friend of mine, John Herford, who were working on a book together. They suddenly started decorating themselves up, and all the Batek groups in this time of year will start decorating themselves up with these flowers, beautiful smelling flowers. They look really amazing, the kind of headdresses, and they smell great. So they're beautiful, but they're not just beautiful, visually beautiful, and have beautiful aromas for kind of everyday relations. They're also, that's what the spirits like, the Ajum for the Maya, or Halat Asal for the Batek Day. Right. And so at this time, they didn't actually perform a ritual on this day, but they were telling me, what do you know about, when we do these shamanic rituals? So this guy is not actually shaman, saying this is what the shaman will do. He'll be in the center here. He's surrounded by this chorus of singers who are all decorated up, lean-tos decorated with aromatic plants. And then they'll start singing, making music. And as they're singing, and the beautiful smells and beautiful singing will entice their spiritual friends. So that for the Batek Maya, basically known as the Ajum. And as they come in, they will come in and they will go into the the heart, if you like, in the head, and they'll start filling up the shaman's body, but also the bodies of all these the female chorus around. Then when their bodies are filled with these spiritual friends or allies, if you like, then their souls, the individuals here, will emerge out of their bodies and zoom up on a kind of cosmic voyage. But what's very interesting here is the fact that you've got a shaman accompanied, and he has to be accompanied by this collective of women. And then they'll go up to the heavens, if you like, and there they will meet these fruit spirits, and they describe it as these rivers of fruit kind of flowing along, and then fruit blossoms rather, and then they will take these fruit blossoms and they'll take them back to Earth to ensure a bountiful harvest. Okay, that's a Batek Day version of this. Yes, and yes. Yeah.
Sorry, were the women like singing throughout the whole of the shaman's journey, or is that like?
Yeah, they'll keep singing throughout. Yeah, yeah.
And the shaman doesn't sing with them.
The shaman does, yeah.
Oh, as well.
Yeah, yeah. And here you've got, this is a nose flute here, my friend Bolek, who I've known for a very long time. He's quite frail these days, and that height, we kind of make it sound like doodaloo, 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 and it would be quite repetitive. And his wife, who actually I think knows a lot more than him, she's playing with him, and sometimes people will join in with what they call a ding dong, like a Jews harp. You've got this kind of drony sound. Then you've got the bamboo stompers, and then these participants, they spent days making all these kind of bandoliers and headdresses, and then they're sitting down. Then you very slowly start dancing like this, a bit like a Khmer courtly dance, on the ground first, very, very slow, very delicate movements, and gradually you'll rise up and you'll be dancing like this. And then eventually, I was really surprised when this first happened. Then we started doing the conga, like at a kind of a wedding through the forest. Like this, are you joking? No, definitely. Yeah. And it was really, really great fun. But again, here we see this serpentine movement in this ritual. This is the most important ritual of the year for these groups. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, just have a quick question. Because I think your colleague spoke previous lecture. He said that the sexual imbalance at some of these rituals was a function of the previous enslavement.
Is this Alice?
I think so. Am I correct? said that, or maybe I've got it confused. It was because so many men have been taken as slaves.
Are you Alex? You are Alex? Yeah.
No.
I thought it was Alice.
I was wondering why you thought.
Oh, I thought it was Alice. Sorry. Okay, sorry. And then I said Alice, then I thought, oh, no, she's not answering me. Oh, sorry. Okay. Sorry, apologies. Yeah, I haven't got my glasses on. Excuse me. Yeah. Sorry. So I don't know who said that then? Which lecturer?
It was about, I think it was someone, I think it was about a similar area, I think.
Really?
Is that who you mean?
I can't remember.
Was it Southeast Asian group?
Yes, so
Enough.
I'm not sure.
Maybe I've got it.
I don't know. I didn't see that lecture.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, so I'm going to start talking now a little bit about Australian rainbow serpents, because the term rainbow serpent actually was coined by anthropologists working with Aboriginal groups. So this is from Burnt, and it was cited in Chris's book, Blood Relations. Okay, so the Workle, younger sister, non-bleeding, began to dance to hinder the snake's progress. The Yalungal, rainbow snake, stopped her in her course and watched the dancing, but the girl grew tired and called out, "Come on, sister, your turn now, I want to rest." The older sister, Gungman, bleeding afterbirth blood, came out from the hut, leaving her child in its cradle of soft paper bark, and began to dance. But her blood, still intermittently flowing, attracted the snake further, and she moved towards them. "Come on, sister," cried the Gungman. "It's no good for me, my blood is coming out, and the snake is smelling it." See, they got that smell. Blood's always associated with the smell. And coming closer, "It's better for you to go on dancing." So the younger sister continued, and again Yalungal stopped and watched. In this way, the Wawalak took in turns to dance. When the younger sister danced, the snake stopped. And when the older one continued, she came forward again. So the younger girl danced longer than the other, and as she swayed from side to side, the intensive activity caused her menstruation to begin. Then the python, smelling more blood, came forward without hesitation. So this is a kind of a very important myth in Aboriginal Australia. There's a couple of things I want to relate back from that to Malaysia. So when my wife was pregnant, when I was doing my fieldwork, Batek friend said to me, "You can no longer go to the forest because you will smell, you'll carry the odor of her blood with you, and this will attract dangerous animals. You know, you could be attacked, yeah? We'll see that comes up in other places, but same if she's menstruating." So you've got these very, menstrual taboos don't just affect women, they affect men as well. And if you want to move through the forest for the Bateks, then they'll be covered with, they'll carry these big leaves to stop anything getting on them. So it's like this, Fraser talks about this, not to touch. Can you not hear?
I'm just so interested in that particular bit.
Not to
The
touch.
sun shall not shine on her head, nor her feet touch the ground.
Yeah, exactly. Made famous by the Doors song later, not to touch the earth, So this we find, Fraser was onto something there. Fraser talked about this, and he found it in countless myths throughout the world, okay? So, again, from Chris's book here, Aboriginal legends frequently depict the world as being created by the moon, a great snake, or by an all-mother, or other semi-human immense entity who combines lunar/tidal features with snake-like, mother-like, and rainbow-like ones. Okay, so think back to the moon life soul story I told you earlier. Batek might have similar stories. All these taboos about the moon. Think about how it's blood that attracts these monstrous things. What are these rainbow serpents? That's the big question, really. So this is from Radcliffe Brown back in 1926. The wowie is a serpent-like creature which lives in deep water holes and burrows into the bank where he makes his den. When a man is going on a visit to this monster, he must paint his body all over with red ochre. He then follows after the rainbow someday when there is a thunder shower, and at the end of the rainbow rests over the waterhole in which is the wowie's abode. The man then dives under the bank where he finds the wowie, who conducts him into his den and sings him a new song for the corroboree. The man repeats the song after the wowie until he has learnt it sufficiently, and then starts back to his own people. When they see him returning painted red and singing, they know he has been with a wowie. Okay, so keep that in mind. This Sorry, because remember I lost my slides on the train. Okay, so now we're going to go back to the Batek. Okay, so this is a story by a Batek elder who sadly passed away now in Qualico in Kelantan. So this guy, he's now, when I interviewed him, he was already, I'd say, late 60s, early 70s. And you could tell he was charming. He had a thing like a bracelet on like this, a black bracelet going around, which is kind of often a sign of a shaman. That he said, "Look, Ivan, I want to tell you the story when I first became a shaman, if you like." So I said, "Oh, I'd love to hear that." So he's about 18 years old. So this would have been 1960s, I guess, roughly. And that's the time of the Malayan emergency. Okay, and you also it's kind of still had British colonial era doctors there. Actually, it was probably in the late 50s, I think, thinking about it. Okay, anyway, he said, right, so this is how he told me the story. I've got my notes, but this is basically what's there. He said, I dived down, I swam down for 24 hours through the underworld sea. I passed giant fish and giant naga. I swam down and down and down and down. And I eventually got into this underworld kind of huge cavern. Yeah. As I walked along this pathway, gigantic naga with huge gaping mouths and huge fangs, huge teeth. I had to walk between them all. And after that, then I swam up through the underworld sea. And then with the help of these kind of like Hermes, like whirring wings on his feet, and he flew up through the cosmos, right up into the sky world. And in the sky world, there were these strange creatures, human-like, but with kind of animal tails or bird feathers. So these half human, half animal spirits. And I saw Gobar, but his lightning was firing out of his eyes, so I couldn't see what he really looked like. And then I saw these strange. I looked down on the earth. So he's got this kind of synoptic vision of the world below him. I could see Japan. I could see Kota Baru. Kota Baru is this huge, it's the most important Malaysian town there. I could see London. I could see everything. Super excited. I looked down and I could see, and this is his words, not mine. I could see the Negroes in Africa, and I could see them, but they looked dangerous. They weren't like the black people in Africa today. So he's kind of got, so it's a kind of a mishmash of all these colonial experiences and kind of tropes from the colonial period, kind of racial othering, the huge power and prestige of Malay cities. But layered on all this, you've got this extremely ancient, I would say, because we're finding it all over the world, stories of these Nagas. And this shamanic initiation, much like this one, it involves meeting the Naga. Okay, Batek might have similar stories, and they've even said to me they go down and they might ride the Naga, you know. Okay, right, so back to Australia. So almost all over Aboriginal Australia, divinity or ritual power is conceptualized as an immense rainbow, which is simultaneously a snake. So that's exactly the same for the Batek. The Naga, okay, is the one underground, or Badgie. In the sky, it's Dranic, but it's the same. The rainbow is the soul reflected in the sky of the serpent. It's often seen like that in Malaysia, very similar in Australia. And Chris argues that rainbow snake variations are endless, leading us to suppose that what all these myths are referring to is not really a thing at all, but a cyclical logic which lies beyond and behind all the many concrete images: moon, snakes, tidal forces, waterholes, rainbows, mothers, and so on, used in partial attempts to describe it. So rather than seeing this as kind of a monster in the typical reified sense, you've got to see it as a kind of, as a cultural logic, a rhythmic movement, okay? And here we go. The Dalabon term belong signifies not only rainbow snake and the mother of all of us, but also ambiguity in form, creativity, power, and time long past. That's Madec, writing 1974. Right, now let's shift over. So we've talked a little bit about Australia. We could talk about Australia for weeks on end, and we could talk about Malaysia a lot more. But I want to give you a quick kind of overview of these three areas of the world. So now we're on to Australia, to Amazonia and the Rainbow Sea. So here we've got, you know, in some parts of the world, the Milky Way is incredible. Okay, so for many Amazonian groups, the Milky Way is itself the rainbow snake in the sky, as is the river. We'll see various images of the river. So anthropologists working in Amazonia, so including Rowe, writing in 1989, describe serpentine worldviews. And they have this tripartite cosmos, very much like the Batek one that I described to you earlier. And during the day, the sky is the realm of the rainbow as great snake, tempest with rain and or hail, lightning flash and thunderclap. At night, this realm becomes the Milky Way, itself a gigantic snake. And the subterranean worlds are primarily subaquatic and feminine. And you get this association with these rainbow serpents in Amazonia with anacondas, caimans, turtles, piranhas, armor-headed catfish, and pink freshwater dolphins. In Australia, they'll be associated with saltwater crocodiles and a variety of other aquatic life. These are kind of seen as their allies on Earth. In Malaysia, it's the same thing with the local fauna there. Okay, so we'll have a look at a bit more of Roe. The celestial dragon is associated. The celestial dragon is associated with excessive celestial water. That is the deluge, the tempest. Same thing in Malaysia. These are the torrential downpour accompanied by high winds, hurricane, wherever we get our term from, announced by excessive noise, din, thunderclap, and accompanied by natural excessive fire, lightning. So again, what's interesting here, you've got these oppositions, water, fire, high, low, light, dark, okay? The subaquatic dragon is also the master or mistress of excessive terrestrial water, floods. Coming from the fecund but dangerous lower realm, this dragon is the bearer of root crops and fruits, but is also the incestuous aquatic seducer of women, who are his fish women daughters, and the initiator of menstruation and decay. So again, closely linked up with menstruation. His ally is the night. He is the long subaquatic phallus of the moon, just as the celestial dragon partakes of some of the brilliance of the sun's headdress. So quite a nice quote there. Now, so a particularly interesting anthropologist working in Amazonia, who Chris and Camilla, I think Louise has come in and given talk to, hasn't she, before? I don't, or not,
Well,
maybe not.
she stayed with us at UEL for a year.
Right.
I don't think we did. Can't remember whether she gave a talk to me or not, but you know her very well.
Right, brilliant. Yeah. So what's strange, you do have, there's lots and lots of accounts of these rainbow serpents in Amazonia. We've also got fantastic accounts of ritual life in Amazonia. And we often find stories of kind of male initiations involving bleeding, which again, is something we find in Australia as well, which is kind of like a male, it's often described as male menstruation, really. It's men bleeding as if they're women. And you have these stories in both areas and in Papua as well of men stealing this ritual power from women and then performing it through things like male menstruation. So in Australia, that can involve sub-incision rituals or bleeding rituals, okay? But none of the anthropologists, we've also got fantastic, accounts of mythology from South America. Peter Gow, Dolmatov, Stephen Hugh Jones, and his wife, Christine Hugh Jones. These fantastic books, okay? But they haven't been kind of comparatively, I don't think, pulled together, as well as Louise Elvira Belande's work. I mean, she does a brilliant job. And she describes it as a cross-cultural snake-like theory of blood, articulated around the notion of change of skin or body, which is central key in Amazonian perspectival shamanism and cosmology. Chris gave a talk about perspectivism, I believe, 2 weeks ago or something, roughly. Okay, so this shape-shifting visions according to different animals. But it's this notion of change, okay? But if you look at, the skin of snakes shedding, they are animals par excellence of transformation, much as the moon is as well, because the moon, you can see it changing, coming back to life before you. You couldn't choose better ideas about this. So throughout the Amazon, bleeding, this is again a quote from Louisa, is related to women's intimate relationship with anacondas. The water anaconda is a master of dédoublement. for it has a two-forked tongue and penis, may live in the water as well as on land and trees, and embodies the cosmic rainbow and underwater serpent, regarded as mother or owner of all snakes. Okay, if you think about my first images, Batek with the turtle snake, once again, it's always these kind of semi-aquatic animals that are kind of in between two worlds as well in the ways they live. So when you see these animals, it's kind of the myth brought to life through the very behavioral characteristics, the anatomy of these animals. Okay, another one. In Amazonia, menstruation is widely attributed to women's snake-like shedding of skin body and their synchronicity with moon cycles. So incredibly important. And I mean, I think it's much more vivid here than in some of the Batek examples that I mentioned. You see it in the Batek myths, you see it in their taboos, but here it's really, you know, it's the full force. That's the same thing in Australia too. Okay, so so that actually, so the first part's my I thought that's weird. It says Batek. Okay, so this is the first part's for me. Similar to the Batek and other orang asli in Malaysia, in Amazonia, menstruating women generally interrupt most or at least some of their daily chores and observe a period of sexual abstinence, eating food considered bland, such as vegetables, and the meat of animals and fish said to have little blood. Their diet excludes the meat of animals regarded as having lots of blood, such as tapir. Women also avoid going to the river or the forest, touching any piece of material culture and coming close to men. And these kind of taboos, okay, about menstruating women, we also found, well, probably still find in some parts of Europe now. I mean, parts of Italy, Spain, Portugal, if a woman was menstruating, there's no way she would be allowed near crops or certain tools. Often, I mean, Camilla talked about this, I don't know if it's talked in Plymouth or here, but about, you know, hunters' darts and things. If a woman's menstruating, they lose all their power completely. They have all the power. That's exactly the same amongst Batek. So it's got this power to kind of do anything comes into contact, it loses its potency, if you like. Okay. So she goes on. The blood let by people has a transformational effect upon lived experiences and opens up the curtains of communication perception, usually separating daily experience from other cosmological space-times. Its interconnection with shamanism is therefore fundamental. Throughout Amazonia, letting blood is the change of skin body par excellence, and it is women who most saliently bring it about in their menses and childbirth. So I think there's one thing I'm actually writing about this at the moment, this kind of space times. I'll come back to that a bit later. So we've got this incredible. We can see if we've got stories like this in Amazonia, in Southeast Asia, in Australia, in Africa, as Camilla's described very similar things in her work. Chris has described all kinds of places too. You've got to think, why? I mean, you can't simply explain it away. I mean, there's some pretty awful explanations, if you know. We've got the kind of Freudian explanations, Jungian archetypes, so kind of magical, like we're all somehow got access to some kind of magical archetypes. Other ones will be, oh, well, they're snakes. People have a kind of built-in fear of snakes, so therefore that's why they're really important. It doesn't make sense because these aren't simply snakes. They're rainbow serpents. Sometimes they can breathe fire. They're connected with menstruation. They're connected with the blood of game animals. Why would you find exactly the same complex of ideas if you just had some kind of naturalistic explanation? It just doesn't work for me in the slightest. I think they're quite pathetic, a lot of them. Okay, so this is a Bakuna healer, a quote from an interview with them, cited in Arman in 2004. A woman is changing skin with menstruation. That is why she cannot go to the forest or stay under the sun or go to the river. If she walks by the river, a violent wind awaits. In the trees, there is a species of stork called Butuasena that come down to earth and take on the shape of any animal. They come down trees to attack the woman who has her menses, and they may take her into their house. In that moment, the woman becomes crazy when she sees how animals come out of everywhere to kidnap her. Very, very similar stories amongst Bateks. You just simply can't go in there. Not just the woman, but her husband can't go in either. Okay, so going back to Siskind now, 1973. Listen, I will tell you, said Basta. In the darkness, Moon made love to his sister. It was an evening, and he kept making love to her. She wondered who her lover was. So in the darkness, she painted half of his face with black genipa. The next day, she watched the men going along the path. Suddenly, she saw the man. No, it cannot be. It's my older brother who has genipa on one side of his face. May you die, she said. May a foreigner now kill you. He ran from his angry sister, crying. Okay.
Climbed away, and then that's his face.
Yeah, he becomes Moon Man. Yeah. Okay. So she also describes how women's cycles are closely associated with the moon across Amazonia. The moon governs the tides, the waxing and waning of all liquids, including blood, as they run along meandering slate-like rivers and veins. In Amazonian cosmology and mythology, Moon is a major figure, often explicitly paired to the water anaconda, as in the Kashinahua figure of Yube, moon/snake. Yet the figure of Moon has been left out of most theoretical debates. You know,
all theoretical.
Yeah, it's incredible. But if
you mustn't mention the moon. Do not mention the moon.
Yeah, but you know why? If we go back to the Batek stuff, you know, you've got these taboos pointing at the rainbow, pointing at the moon. You've got this original time where you die with the moon, which again is connected to the tides, obviously, through the other term, Nyawa Bulan, the moon lifestyle, Nyawa Tom, the water lifestyle. It's all there, and we see it all across. Well, I mean, actually, I think it's worth mentioning your work, Camilla, in with the Hadza here. With did you give the talk here a couple of weeks ago? Was it or not? I know it was in Reading.
No, it's the
Plymouth one as well.
No, sorry, in the book club.
Yes. Yeah, but the Hadza Bay, I mean, the important thing is that I think that the women said that they would bleed with.
Oh, they're very much, they use the moon as a clock.
As a clock.
To know when they're going
That's
to
the important point.
Yeah.
When she says, when Balonde says the moon has been left out of most theoretical debates, what she's saying is that they know and they admit and they describe, yes, the moon's in the stories, the moon's sort of up there, but if you're doing science, the moon doesn't figure within science. Any kind of science, behavioral ecology, evolutionary psychology, whatever it is, if you're doing science, you must involve the moon.
Yeah.
You know, so that's what she's pointing at.
Yeah, and this is the point why I called my talk Serpentine, or I said we could have called it Lunar Cosmopolitics as well. Because humans, as we've evolved as a species, we have evolved in other species with other species. It might be worth even mentioning the paper about the lions, I think, here. So, for example, back in Africa, as we're evolving as a species, well, lions and other large felines have incredibly good vision at night. Humans don't. Okay, so when it's dark moon, that's when the lions really go out and do most of their hunting. So humans, it wouldn't be in our evolutionary, it wouldn't be evolutionary advantageous to go out hunting at the same time as massive bloody cats that can kill you. And in fact, in the paper, who was the person who read that paper? Packer. Yeah, an excellent. Yeah, it's an excellent paper, and he shows, you know, the chances of being killed by a lion are much, 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 much higher at dark moon. So at the time of the dark moon, you wouldn't want to be going out. You wouldn't want to be going out hunting. So we'll come to this a bit later anyway, okay? But you've got to bear in mind, for human, in terms of human evolution in that Paleolithic environment, we're coordinating already with the moon, okay? So perhaps that's one of the reasons why this is so important, one of the reasons, okay? Another, when women bleed, they're said to see moon. But rather than quoting her, I mean, this is like these expressions, oh, she's with the moon. We find them all over the world. The links between menstruation quite simply means it means the time of the moon, moon time. Okay, so when women bleed, they're said to see moon, reenacting in their blood flow the mythical events of moon's incest and revenge. However, women's blood is seldom given attention to in the dominant paradigm of incest established by alliance theory. Well, in fact, if you look at the Amazonian literature, it's completely gender blind, really. Not all of it. Joanna Overing's different. There are exceptions, Luisa Belande. But it's like, for me, similar in Southeast Asia. I mean, lots of the anthropologists working out there were men, not all of them, but it's kind of like this obsession with the thunder deity, who's really, really important, quite clearly in Batek mythology, but it's like not talking about this Serpentine Naga who's associated with women. And again, it's mentioned in passing, you know, menstrual taboos, but nobody's saying, well, why are they here? And they're the same in Africa, and they're the same in Australia and Amazonia. Okay, so perhaps would one of you two like to step in and explain? So I've said to me,
Oh, this is excellent.
yeah,
I mean, there would also be a lot to be said on fire and the Southern African rain snakes.
of course, yeah,
Yes. Oh, right.
a tiny bit or not. If you don't want to, don't worry.
Okay, I mean, it's just the basis of Hadzade cosmology is very much organized by the moon, for Ebene being the major ritual for the entire, both genders as a kind of ritual healing. So there is women singing in association with men's dances that have a healing aspect. And that has to happen on the moonless night when the Milky Way, of course, is very fully visible. But then there's an association that I'm lining up menses on there because women definitely have, not just women, men as well, the idea that women should be bleeding around the dark moon.
Yeah.
They will not state that it's specifically in relation to Ebene, but the inference is that is why it's part of the sacred time. And then as the moon becomes visible again, there is a period which Ellen has been working with to identify that we understand is when animals would be too lean, it would not be possible to hunt for the animals. They would just be lean if we hunted for them. And of course, the arrow poison doesn't work because woman is menstruating, but also the moon itself means the arrow poison doesn't work. And that is the time when lions can see, but hunters can't. Hunters themselves would be hunted by lions. As the moon waxes, goes around past the first quarter and up to full moon, that is the most successful time for hunting for the Hadza, particularly as Ian's worked on the nocturnal waterhole hunting, which is lunar scheduled. That is the time when hunters will be able to see lions, the least dangerous time for them, and the most successful as the animals come to the waterhole to hunt. So the whole this
economy and
is
ritual
valley for the Hadza. We have a Pleistocene lunar ecology of hunting with ritual, with women's bodies. But all that. Cosmology.
There's no end to the sort of complex descriptions we can say that. But getting really, really, really back to basics. If you've got any kind of rule-governed behaviour, if there's certain, like you mustn't have sex whatever time, you're allowed to go hunting whatever time, whatever. You've got to divide up time in some way. And you really would predict, wouldn't you, that if this is a new idea, we're starting out categorize sex at the time, you start out with the simplest possible way of doing it. If you're dividing up the time into different categories, the simplest thing is just 2 categories. And if you're using the moon to do that, you haven't got any choice. If you say light, lots of light from the moon, or not so much light, it's going to be a gradient. It's going to be more or less. There's only one way you can make it like 2 categories, because there's only 2 points there. There's a point on when it switches from waxing to waning, and the point where it switches from waning to waxing.
You're
Yeah.
picking
So
the
it's
right
just- so it's-
case
I'm just
because
saying-
Epinay is his last quarter to
So I'm just saying, contrary to what Camilla's saying, that although you can have all kinds of really interesting details of how it works out in practice,
Mm.
the logic of it is that,
Mm.
and obviously people aren't going to be completely stupid. They're not going to stick to it absolutely. When
Yeah.
it's inconvenient, they're going to make all sorts of decisions about. For example, the moon might be behind the nearest
Mountain.
hill or rock or something.
Yeah.
And so it won't be precisely at that switch point.
Mm.
But we still need conceptually to understand why it isn't, for example, more or less moonlight.
Yeah.
It's not more or less moonlight. It's waxing and waning as the sort of model, and then people work around that in all sorts of complicated and different ways. But you can just get a huge headache if you keep on getting more and more detail. We want something which explains the detail, and that's the simple model.
It's very simple. And I mean, the moon is, if you're a hunter group, the moon is the clock. It's the big clock in the sky. It's like having a giant thing in the sky that everyone can see, as long as it's not too cloudy or the mountains are in the way. Most of the time you can see it. And that's what you're going to base your life on. I mean, we see, I don't know how many people in the audience here today are kind of anthropologists or archaeologists or just from the general public. But what's important is it's much later. So humans became a symbolic culture-bearing species around 200,000 years ago, roughly, I would say. It wasn't until around 12,000 years ago that we see the emergence of agriculture. Of course, with agriculture, you get a shift to a solar calendar. In this country, it wasn't until, what, 4,000 years ago, agriculture, you know. Of course, then you shift your ways of thinking about time. It becomes solarized. That's when you get all these solar gods emerging. But most of our history, and we've got a very short history on this planet as a species. 200,000 years is not a very long time, okay? But for most of our history, it would have been living under a lunar clock, 100%, you know? I think that's without a doubt the case. I think we see this in all these societies. Right. So Chris here, I think, could step in, and because Chris has got this a theory, it's outlined in his, well, it's not outlined, it's detailed in his book, Blood Relation, okay? Which he outlines this time-resistant syntax or sex strike theory of human origins. So I would say, okay, I've mentioned there's a lot of ridiculous ideas how to explain this away. Freudian, Jungian, psychoanalysis, a natural kind of, snakes, we're just all frightened of snakes, it must be because of this. You can't, it doesn't pull everything together. Another one that I saw, which is from Robert Blust's book, is this idea that, oh, rainbows, you know, you see them in waterfalls and things, and he kind of explains that way. Robert Blust's book's brilliant in some ways because it's a very systematic comparison of rainbow snake myths across the planet. I mean, he makes a few errors in it, but generally it's very good. But the conclusions at the end of it, he just explains it away into nothing. You know, there's nothing there. So, Chris, if you wouldn't mind, just for perhaps a few minutes for people who've never heard the ideas before, you could explain.
Actually, this wasn't quite already persistent in my book Revelation.
Right.
Basically, me with Camilla and Ian in 1995 would be kind of really worked out. So it's just ever so simple. On the left here, we have ritual power switched on. And those things like loud signals, waxing moon signals, I don't think of them as different signals. They're just so many different aspects of ritual power switched on. So they're all sort of interchangeable on the left-hand side. And then on the other side, okay, we've got the full moon. Okay, everyone can just relax now, have a nice time, enjoy yourself, have lots of sex, lots of food. Don't worry about all these taboos. And so off is what we're calling weak signals. And all those things like weak, waning moon, availability, all that. I don't think of them as separate different things. They're not. They're just different ways of looking at the same thing, which is just you switched off the ritual power. And it's just that in any myth right around the world, just try it out. You don't expect the storyteller to mix up off with on. Because if you mix up the off signal with the on signal, you haven't got a signal. So and it just means you can do it, but no one will notice your story. It won't be remembered. It won't have any impact. If you make a big horror film or I don't know, any kind of important sort of work of art, and you mix that off with on, it does the two things cancel out.
Yeah.
So we don't expect storytellers to mix them up. It just you'll find there are no exceptions to that, or rather, it's not quite like that. In fact, exceptions are like errors and mistakes made by very bad storytellers. Whose books don't get published, whose films don't get box office hits, whose myths get forgotten after a few generations, one generation. So, and just test that with any fairy tale that has been told over the generations, you will find that absolutely respected. There'll be no falsification. It means that you have a falsifiable model. You can just test it. It's easy to prove it wrong. Just come up with a story where I don't know, a menstruating woman is like eating cooked beef or something. I don't know. Just come up with it.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a few more things I think we should add here. So Chris, Camilla and Ian's theory together, I think I can describe it as, is a theory about the origins of human symbolic culture, okay? So by that, they mean language, ritual, myth, dance, theatre, all these things that we have that make human life so rich and make us so different than other animals. Other animals can communicate with each other. Other animals cannot talk about rainbow serpents or unicorns or quantum physics, these abstract things. So something happened, okay, of course, in Darwinian theory, okay, you've got the emergence of anatomically modern, behaviorally modern Homo sapiens sapiens, yeah? But what is it that actually something's happened that's enabled us to communicate through language, through ritual? So certain conditions have to be in place for that to happen, okay? So the theory kind of, if you like, you've had, if I've got a couple of minutes, I think it's worth mentioning Sarah Hurdy's work on the grey ceiling. So you've got in evolutionary history of humans, you've got, is that right or not? Can I or not?
Well, it's going to be opening a huge Pandora's box.
Okay, I'll skip it for today. Okay, okay, that's fine. Let's leave it for now.
If anyone's
Okay.
got more
Questions, we can come back to them later. Okay,
because
that's fine.
I think the important thing is linking that syntax to the standard complex.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's what's
Yeah,
yeah, we know that comes out of a specific behavioral ecology
Right.
model.
yeah.
I don't
Okay,
think
let's leave it
we-
at that. I mean, come back to
Yeah,
more
come
talks
back
in RAG
to-
if you haven't, because these are the kind of
Yeah.
things that we can look at, and other people, evolutionary biologists and paleontologists and archaeologists can talk to you about this stuff. Okay.
And we will be talking about all the ochre in
Yeah.
Well,
archaeology.
I'm actually interested in your stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's talk about it.
So okay, so I think I'm going to go back to my stuff here. So this is some of the recent changes that we've seen in Malaysia. Iron ore mining, deforestation, the smashing up of these sacred casts. So this is this ritual, mythological, cosmological landscape being ripped apart. It's the apocalypse, if you like, for Batak people happening. And this is the same story for indigenous people worldwide. I mean, Batak's the people I work with, but this is indigenous peoples across the Congo Basin, across Amazonia, across Papua New Guinea. They're seeing the whole world of creation destroyed before their eyes, you know. So this causes cosmological collapse. So of course, these activities anger actually the Rainbow Serpent or Brunner, and she rocks and rides. So during my field work, there was the Japanese tsunami. I think the date's wrong there. Anyway, but they said that's because the Naga rocked and ride. And they said to me when I was doing my field work, well, our shaman has been there. You know, he went over to Japan. I mean, he didn't take an aeroplane. He went there on a soul journey. And he went down into the underworld and he got his Ajam allies. They take the Batek Maya shamans take these magical multicolored threads. And he tied up the underworld serpent and he tied the earth back together. And that would stop it. they've got all these stories of them doing. It's very similar to what Harry Walker describes amongst the Irina. They're kind of like climate shamans, if you like. It's a climate shamanism. I've got a Mongolian friend who's a shaman. He does very similar kind of stuff in Mongolia. This is a key thing affecting. So alongside in these shamanic stories and in the mythology, we've got simultaneously cosmopolitics, which talks about, which connects us with the moon, the tides, menstrual, the rest of the landscape that people live in. So you've got that kind of ancient origin stuff going back. I'd say it's obviously, this has got a Paleolithic origin back in Africa before people moved out into different parts of the world. But it's so important, this stuff, it's remained alive in cosmologies worldwide. But alongside that, you've got traces of colonial history. You've got, it's a commentary on what's happening in the world today. It's not like things are just locked in the past and one story, that's all it does. Stories and myths and shamanic exploits do lots of things simultaneously. And this is what I've kind of, it's like they collapse space and time through these myths. There's lots going on at the same time. Yes.
So contemporary events really resonate with
of course,
history.
Exactly. Much in the same way as, if you see an anaconda in Amazonia, you see a saltwater crocodile doing something, you see, so that's what it's doing, what happened in the myth. But this is, we told you, you destroy the rainforest, if you break these taboos. The other one was the tsunami of 2004. Okay, they said that's because the Indonesians, well, there's various versions. In a Batek Maya version, they were laughing at animals, and then these frog spirits are associated with water. They all turned and transformed in this gigantic wave that then destroyed, Thailand and Indonesia. Batek Day, they had a story. They're different stories. It's not like one story for the whole people. One story was there was an Indonesian woman working in the Middle East, in Dubai, I think, and she was being really mistreated by her employer. There's lots of Malaysian home workers working in that area. Yeah, and she was so upset with her employer. She did this magic and took her menstrual blood and poured it into the sea. And by the time that got back, then that transformed into this gigantic wave and destroyed the area. You see what I mean? You can do all kinds of clever things, but it's true, this is what's happening. You can see it. You can see the tsunami. Okay, so this flooding in this area is increasing out every single year because of deforestation. It's not just affecting indigenous people, it's infecting, this is Gurba saying, this is a lot of Malays and Chinese living in this town. Each year the floods away, causing billions of dollars of damage. It's massive. You've seen the floods, Adam, I guess, yeah? They're huge, aren't they? Each year worse and worse and worse. It's Kuala Crane, Kalantan. The whole town's coming underwater. This is the Naga rising, So, conclusions. I'm at the end. Okay. So we've seen I've mentioned a few of these ways of explaining things away. They don't work. You need a testable theory that is based upon evidence. And I think sex strike theory, so Chris Camilla Ian's theory, is by far the simplest explanation for why we find these similar cosmological forms, rituals, prohibitions, myths, animisms or shamanisms all across the planet. The Serpentine worldviews that I've described together, or Serpentine cosmopolitics of Amazonia, Southeast Asia, Australia, Africa, many other places, can be best understood through the snake-like theory of blood. So third point, just to remind you, that's transformation animism, because in animism you can transform into different, like the Bateks becoming tigers, for example. Shamanic skin shedding. So when you become a tiger, by the way, you take off your human skin and you put on a tiger skin. If you want to be an elephant, you take off your human skin, you put on an elephant. It's all about skin changing. Yeah. Skin shedding, menstrual prohibitions, moon and dragon myths and rituals, and the thunder complex are all aspects of exactly the same thing. We don't need a theory for the thunder complex, another theory for Australian rainbow straits, another theory for menstrual prohibitions in another part of the world. The same theory, you can understand everything through. And if you want a theory, you don't want multiple theories in science. You want one theory that can explain as much as possible. Okay. Animisms, blood rituals, and shamanisms must be understood, I think, as politics. It's fundamentally politics, and it's fundamentally gendered politics. Okay, and this is why, I mean, science for you know, since the beginning of science has been generally gender blind. Of course, one of the major revolutions in science in this century was the turn toward feminism and people starting to talk about gender. But it's still many anthropological theories are gender blind, which is a shame. So whether in ancient times of a human symbolic revolution or in today's world marked by ferocious state capitalist violence, it's intensifying every single day under the current political system. We have to think through things in terms of gender, in terms of politics, and I think these theories help us do it. That's the end. Right, sorry, I probably went on a bit too long. Sorry about that, God. I wasn't watching the clock.
Very comprehensive indeed.
Thank
Which is
you.
astonishing. This vast subject of vast entities all linked up, beautifully linked up. And people in the room would like to ask questions and then ask again.
Yeah.
Can we come off the floor?
Yeah.
Adam?
One quick little question.
Yeah.
You were saying that there was ceremonies, I think,
Yeah.
in the forest was being
Yeah.
down in the woods. Be displayed.
It's kind of yeah.
Do the women also go?
Yeah, they all go together. All go together. They must all go together. And in lots of
Repeat the question, just
okay, so repeat the question. So Adam mentioned there when I was talking about the Batak Maya shamanic ceremony, the women are singing, the women chorus is singing, they've got the shaman in the center. Who goes on this shamanic journey? All of them go. The man cannot go without these women. And I think I'm the first anthropologist to describe this kind of thing, as far as I've seen, yeah, of women being women accompanying men. And I think again that's a male bias when they're looking at shamanic accounts. It wouldn't surprise me to find this in many other places.
They're not sending him off.
No, they're helping.
They're
I
going-
think they're keeping him under control, if anything.
It just strikes me, if I can interpolate there, because do you know the Kini and Kini accounts of Jean Trois?
No.
Because
Right.
there do seem to me to be similarities of the
Right.
shamanic healing practice
Right.
aligned with menstrual observation in Khoisan,
Yeah.
Bushman practice, Kalahari. I don't know if Ian would totally agree about that, but yeah, so there is a sort of element of possible male appropriation. So either with the healing dance, which is all dependent on women's singing and polyphony, or with the girls' menstruation, where a healer would use carting and blood falling to create this kind of power launching for everyone in the community to the other first creation.
Okay.
I mean, there are significance, even though you've emphasized the lack of ritualization.
Yeah.
There's just different ways of doing things.
For
it
sure.
seems.
Yeah. For sure.
But it does strike me as there's some similarity.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yes.
We have a question on Zoom.
Right. Yeah.
I can invite Manchego to unmute yourself.
Hi, Manchego.
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
That was
thanks.
great. Christine and I both have the same question. Who is this anthropologist with this psychoanalytic approach that we were talking about?
Oh, Rodney Needham.
Rodney Needham. Okay.
I wouldn't quite describe it as psychoanalytic.
You wouldn't.
Certainly mind over matter.
Mm.
Cognitivist, certainly explaining
It's
things
very
in
much
terms of the innate architecture of the human mind. But then it's Freud, not Needham.
You don't think so? Okay.
I wouldn't
Right.
associate Needham with Freud.
Right.
These are the follow Levi-Strauss. Levi-Strauss.
I know.
Another Freudian.
Yeah, I have read the paper though. I think there's traces of
Well-
they're in there. Maybe unless I'm confusing him with someone else, but I'm pretty sure that
Right.
there's.
I would slightly disagree. with
Okay,
that.
right.
The difference between Levi-Straussian structuralism and Freudianism.
Yeah.
And they don't.
Oh, I know that. I'm totally aware of
They're
that.
not seeing every long thing a penis and every round thing a vagina. They're
No.
not doing all that stuff.
Needham is very classificatory.
I'll revisit that. I'll check it.
Yeah.
Manchego, I'll get back to you on that. But I was referring to the Rodney Needham paper, and I can send those across to you if you like.
That would be great.
Um,
There is a guy who's practicing now. His name is Farrar.
Mhm.
I don't, it starts with a D, his first name. I can't remember what it is, but and I mean, he works in Malaysia,
Mhm.
but my reason is more historical than anything else. So,
Right. Yeah, but I'll get you those papers. There's maybe I've mixed it slightly with another paper that was also talking about the Thunder Complex, but I'll send them across to you. We can have a chat. Yep,
okay.
great. Any other questions?
Yeah, just been recently going through James Woodburn's notes and
Yeah.
encountered the Hadza is an anthropologist who worked with the Hadza in East Africa. And they're unusual amongst African hunter-gatherers because there's very little indicating that they use red pigments, whether plant pigments or red ochre.
Mm.
Over in his notes, he does the two, one mythological and one ritual context, describe the use of red flowers.
Mm. Ah,
Both in one in the case of a boy's initiation, and the other in the case of when this mantis character releases people who it's captured back into society. And I was wondering whether with the women, with the Batek Day women decorating themselves with flowers, whether you'd noticed any sort of
Any colour.
color. I mean, obviously, they're
Yeah, they
colourful,
use a
but like
lot
whether-
of-
whether
Did Zoom
redness
hear
in
Ian?
the
Did
seconds.
Zoom hear Ian?
I'll repeat it. Ian's question. Well, part of it. So Ian was talking about the use of red flowers in which group was it? Hadza rituals, which were
According to James Woodburn.
according to James Woodburn, and he asked me if I see similar use of flowers in these batik, kind of the ways that the women dress themselves up before the fruit season. Well, actually, I mean, I've got lots and lots of photos of, and we've seen lots and lots of different women, and actually men wear these headdresses as well. But it seems to me that they're just taking the most beautiful flowers. We've seen all white flowers, blue flowers, purple flowers, yellow flowers, so all kinds, because there's, I think, yeah, no, I would say to that, to be honest. Yeah. Any other questions? That's interesting though. I'd like to see that paper,
Any more questions?
Yeah.
An observation and a question. The idea of this sort of snake energy moving around and being kind of ancient or being found,
Yeah.
with really unusual cultures, even up into the late Greek period, you had the idea of typhoon.
Yeah.
Typhoon was disrupted, moved through the earth, changed things.
Yeah.
And was an element of chaos within even very late Greek mythos. No, the term Naga. So obviously the Sanskrit.
Yeah.
Are these guys using the term Naga?
Yeah.
So because as you know, there's an Indian influence.
Yeah.
So are they getting it from ancient Sanskrit sources?
The actual word, for sure.
The word is, but the idea.
Oh, no. Okay, right. That's a really great question, actually. So, Southeast Asia is a bit like the Mediterranean. It's crossroads, yeah. So, the Batek, the Jahai, these other Orang-Utan, well, particularly those groups, actually, Jahai, Menrik, Batek, and Sui, these kind of forest-dwelling groups, hunter-gatherers, they've been there for about 60,000 years, yeah. We know you've got similar-ish groups in the Andaman Islands, in the Philippines, Agta, for example. These are the very early people there. They definitely had these, I'm sure, because you can see in the terms, other terms they're using, in the myths, they're so similar, So they're way before Indianization, Indianized.
Chola period, Cholas, weren't they?
Yeah, that's about 2,000 years ago, roughly. Yeah. But of course, when they arrived, these Naga, the terminology, but also the mythology, they're well aware of, like sometimes Bob Denton's talked about the thunder complex, and I think he's right, that Gobar-like figure, he kind of embodies as well the Hinduized slave raiding Malay polities as well. Yeah. So those are kind of palimpsests that are overlaid on top. Likewise, of course, you've got Chinese in Malaysia as well, and then the Chinese have got their own dragon myths, long, in Chinese. So it's interesting in Malaysia because you've got all these different stories coming in, but that's the same in the Mediterranean world as well. The Mediterranean world, I mean, the Greek world is really linked up with ancient India as well, through trade. So I think in some parts of the world, I think we tend to imagine worlds as being isolated off. I mean, if we go back to that ontological stuff, remember I criticized at the beginning these ontological incommensurality, if you like, separate worlds. Actually, humans across the planet have been connected up with other groups. So stories flow in, but behind it, you've got this ancient origins. But of course, so Naga myths, if you like, or serpentine cosmologies would have developed in a certain way in India, independently of Malaysia, but then they came back together later, around 2,000 years ago. Does that help?
Yes. And also within the original people, as they call, do they also use the term Naga?
They do. Yeah, Batek's, Batek Day use the term Naga, most commonly, sometimes Dranik, which really means rainbow Dranik. Whereas the Batek Maya, they use the term Baji. And they do know the term Naga, of course, but they generally would say Baji rather than Naga.
And also language. Batik, is this where Batik comes from, the printing?
No. Yeah, yeah. But Batek, I mentioned Batak, these slave raiders, those words, it really means forest people. Yeah, and so you get Batak, who are more mellow, like the Batek in the Philippines as well. Yeah. Great questions. Yep.
A little thing that's gone on in my brain is that in Sussex, you get knacker holes.
Right.
Which are mythological holes in the bottoms of streams and ponds.
Yeah.
And people have talked about them for centuries.
Yeah.
But in them you get water dragons within.
Perfect. Well,
can we say that to Zoom?
Oh yeah. So in Sussex, we have. Can you remind?
Knacker holes.
Knacker holes. Knacker. Knacker. N-K-N.
Yeah, like knuckle.
Okay, knucker holes, which are associated with serpentine beings too. Yeah. Well, that's exactly the same for Batek. So sometimes you'll talk about on top. Yeah. Or on top of like the highest mountain in Malaysia is actually in Batek territory called Mount Tahan, and on the top there's meant to be a kind of pool or lake. And you can enter that to get to the world of the Naga. It's often myths all around the world. We saw in Amazonia, in Australia, it's these water holes. And it's this association. This is another thing. Actually, Bluss does that very well in his book. He kind of maps out all these lists of associations we find in different places. It's often water holes, caves, the underworld, So that's fascinating. I've never heard of that before. It's really fascinating. Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah. Oh wow, I'm going to check that.
Do you know any actual places where it would be possible? These are sacred water holes. Can we find any?
You can go to Australia.
Oh really?
But can we find them in Sussex?
I mean, we know where we think there might be one, but it's secret.
Right.
Well, okay, but let's initiate some people to the secret.
But isn't that fascinating? The fact that we've talked about these more kind of, if you like, exotic places, Amazonia, Southeast Asia, Australia. You've got them here at home, and that doesn't surprise me in the slightest. I'm really interested to know it, but it's brilliant because you can see it's the same syntax everywhere.
Just on that, there's a classic Grimm's fairy tale on precisely this: the Nixie in the mill pond.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Brilliant. Have to do an analysis of that one. Yeah.
It's the worm in Geordie Land.
Yeah.
isn't there?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Down a well.
Oh, even if you think of Loch Ness Monster, it's this
Loch
huge,
Ness even, yeah.
you
It'll be all over the
yeah.
place. Welsh.
Essex snake,
huh?
Essex serpent.
Essex Serpent, exactly, yeah. Midgard Serpent, yeah. Oh, that's kind of worth mentioning as well. Actually, sometimes you do see them, like in the Batek myths as well. They're holding the whole world. In fact, it's linking up together, the whole thing.
Perhaps can I just remind us of Julian Dewey's work to work out what
Well,
was the original myth?
they're trying to build a phylogeny of world mythology, like continent by continent, or like northern latitudes, African continent, and so forth. That's Jean Kellec as well as Julien Dewey. And he had a very nice Scientific American article on this oldest mythology in the world. But his suggestion was that the very oldest root sort of myth was of a great serpent guarding water, and the implication that would also be guarding women in some sense. So the things are going together from that analysis, which is phylogenetic, cultural evolution analysis.
There's one last point I wanted to make really quickly. I mean, I tried to cover quite a lot in this lecture, and I can understand a lot of people here are perhaps not linguists or anthropologists or archaeologists. Some people are, most people, I guess, are not. Is that right? Yeah. So hopefully the stories and myths that I've told you will see this similarity, between Southeast Asia, Australia, and Amazonia. But if that sparks your interest, and if you haven't been here before, I would definitely recommend coming back to more of the RAG talks, because other people will talk about it in a completely different way. But do you see what I mean? It's to get to the questions more that I didn't have time to get to about, for example, human origins and why they're right at the beginning. Yeah.
Perhaps that's one point to echo what you said, Ivan. It's just that Ivan's been explaining how we all know about these dragons, Korean dragons, Japanese dragons, Chinese dragons, rainbow snakes, anacondas, rain snakes, and all. But the thing is that all the people that try to explain them, including this person, I'm so glad you put me onto Blust. What they want to do is to explain these different versions of rainbow snake by reducing it to something we're all very, very familiar with.
Yeah.
So what's a rainbow snake? Oh, it's a penis.
Yeah.
Because we all know what a penis is, right? Everybody know what a penis is?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you have another thing. This thing is not at all like a penis. It coils around.
Yeah.
Well, it must be a vagina then.
Yeah.
Oh, and then okay. But then it seems to be something to do with radar. Oh, no, it's neither a penis nor a vagina. I'll tell you what it is. It's a weather symbol.
Yeah.
Change the weather. And then you've got this blessed guy. Oh, I know what it is. We all know. Have everyone seen a rainbow? Very mysterious.
Yeah.
It's a rainbow.
Yeah.
So the thing is, nobody wants to learn anything.
No.
Nobody wants to allow these myths to teach you about something new. Namely, for example, the fact that women can synchronize their cycles with the moon to become a hugely snake-like monster of amazing power. Nobody wants to learn anything from this. You want to think, oh yes, it's something we all knew already. Like a penis.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's just so tragically Eurocentric or colonial.
Highly reductivist.
We're not going to learn anything because we know about penises and we know about the weather, and it's one of those damn things.
But the thing is, it's all this ambiguity, all the contradictions within it, and it's things that cannot be explained away through simply saying it's a penis or it's a rainbow on its own, or
they're not making the most of the
Yeah.
fact that there is this intrinsic gender ambiguity.
Yeah.
It's just part and parcel of the whole thing. It's not one or the other.
Yeah.
And making it something as simple as penis takes away the transformational power.
Of course, yeah. It's all about transformation, movement, rhythm, back and forth. And you have to look at the different myths, the different variants of it, like Levi-Strauss attempted to do, but put it all down into the mind, if you like. Yeah, you got to look at it in terms of material reality. Yeah, great. I think that's probably it for today, isn't it?
Thank you very much. Fantastic.
Thanks for joining us online, everyone. Yeah.
Yes.
Hope it didn't go on too long.
I just say a couple of words for.
Thank you, Ivan.
Thanks.
that was a fantastic talk. As you can see, Ivan's just been taking hold of our theory and just looking at the comparative cross-cultural data with his own in-depth ethnography. And it's so compelling as far as we're concerned. But that grasping universal ideas about human mythology and ritual associated to that, so powerful. And thanks to Ivan, one, for coming down here all the way from Plymouth today. It was really lovely of him. And also for advertising further RAG talks. In terms of live here at UCL, we're probably not going to be back until autumn equinox Tuesday, which is when we always start up again. We will try and fit some Zoom Tuesday evenings with international speakers like Vivek, who's with us tonight, and others, probably Tuesdays in May. But we do have events, one, a menstrual hut on Dark Moon Saturday, this Saturday, in Brockwell Park Walled Garden. Please come for the afternoon if you're interested, where we will do some technology of enchantment singing, hopefully, in Brockwell Park Walled Garden, 2 till 5, if you're interested. And there will be a snake-like, dragon-like entity creating a bower there. So we will be doing that. And there is April the 28th, which is the day after the April dark moon, which is a Monday, in the pub, the Two Chairmen. We will make these events details available. So that is in the evening, April 28th, the Monday. We have our poet on comedy communism, Paul Dave. So a poetry reading there. And we'll have 2 weeks after that, we hope, in the same venue, a live event on Where Have All the Menstrual Huts Gone? So those are events coming up in April, May, for anybody interested. So thank you very much, dear Zoom. And we can integrate Zoom as much as possible, either on for the Zooms in May or those events in the pub in April, May. So I'm going to say goodbye to Zoom, and then we'll try and take people to the pub.